My work basically at People's Process, I'm a programs officer, and I did participate in the City Rap 2 in the testing, and of course I'm rolling it out in Kanyama together with Charity and other colleagues. Yeah, thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, David, and thank you for being with us this afternoon. I'd like to give this chance to Alexander. Alexander, please.
Thank you. My name is Alexander Chileshe. I work for UN Habitat. I'm an urbanization and resilience specialist, mainly supporting the regional office for Africa on urban-related matters and resilience-related matters in Southern Africa. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all. I'm seeing we have started to get more participants, and we can now start with the program. So this program will be divided into 3 sessions. The first session will have Alexander, who's an expert in this tool and has had experience with it in many countries, including Zambia. And after that, we will have a group discussion. And then the last session will be specific questions to our speakers as pertaining to what they work to their work. So there'll be questions posed to people who work with the municipality of Zambia, like Charity, and then people in the community like David, and then in the end we'll have Alex again. So thank you all. So now we'll have a session by Alex, who will introduce us to the tool and talk a little bit about it. Alex?
Okay, sure. Thank you very much. So thank you everyone for being part of this discussion. I think it's a very important discussion. The City Rap tool is well, City Rap, as the name in short is, it is the City Resilience Action Planning tool, together with a number of partners. This tool was developed basically because of the needs that we noticed. You know, resilience can be, looking at urban and resilience itself can be a very complex issue. So as UN Habitat look at resilience, especially focusing on the needs of authorities and government in Southern Africa, or Africa basically, or generally places where information is not, your data is not generally. Most resilience tools are very data hungry and really do not give an opportunity for local knowledge, which is very essential in terms of crafting out solutions. And if you are talking about a participatory tool, then there's no way you can leave out local knowledge, because even with the expert knowledge that we may all have, local knowledge still becomes very essential. So a lot of progress has been made since the tool was first implemented, I think in 2013. The tool has now been implemented in over 30 locations, Zambia included. 2 locations in Zambia, actually, Lusaka and Chipata, the city of Chipata in the Far East. So a lot of progress has been made, and the beauty with the tool is that the tool has been implemented in all of these different locations, it has constantly been evolving, because all of us as facilitators, all of us as those providing the training have been learning from each city that we go to, and we've been adjusting the tool to make sure that it becomes as relevant to the cities in which we are implementing this particular tool. As far as the results are concerned, we've achieved very good cities where we've been to, are very anxious to want to improve their resilience position and don't want to keep on facing the same hazards and you know, throughout every year. All of the cities where we have been, there's been a good welcome and interest in wanting to implement a tool. What the tool does is it focuses on really beginning from the general. First of all, working with people to understand what resilience is, working together to understand what resilience is and have that common understanding. We do a crash course for 4 days in which we just want to understand resilience in the same way. As far as UN Habitat is concerned, when we implement this tool, we're focusing on resilience on what we call 5 pillars. One focusing on urban economy, one focusing on disaster reduction, one focusing on I forget the other 3, but basically those particularly five pillars. That is the understanding we want to bring to the community which was. Do they agree? Don't they agree with what we're particularly saying? And then from the general, we begin to work toward the very specific through community mapping, through assessing the strengths and weaknesses. It becomes very interesting at that particular point because community members begin to understand the strengths and weaknesses of their council and also begin to understand the various bottlenecks that their local authority may be facing and just how important community members and other stakeholders are with regard to the city or the local authority doing what it's supposed to do. Eventually, what we end up with is not wanting to solve everything, but focusing on a few catalytic issues, basically 5 or 6, that will move the city to a different level in terms of resilience, practical outcomes, which will help the city become much more resilient. So we've achieved good results. For Lusaka, the city is moving towards finding resources to now start implementing those resilience outcomes. For Zimbabwe, I know that the first city in which we did the city RAP 2, we've done the city RAP in process in 2 more cities, and the government wants to be trained. The Ministry of Local Government, they wants to be trained so that they can start implementing this tool countrywide. In Malawi, again, there's been very good progress, and other countries as well. South Africa, we did a training of trainers for 3 cities, and they want to get moving in implementing the tool and improving their resilience position. So in terms of my role, I've basically been a trainer and a facilitator in this particular process. So let me stop here for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex. That was a really good presentation. I'd like to invite anyone who has any questions regarding what Alex has just presented on local knowledge, on his experience with the City RAP tool, on community mapping, the importance of training the communities, and the importance of the community understanding what's being done by the municipalities and working together. So if there's anyone who would like to pose a question to Alex, as he said, he's implemented this tool in more than 1 city in Zambia and in several other places in Africa. Any questions, please?
Yeah, can I jump in?
Yeah, sure.
My name is Dr. Nicodemus Nandiko. I'm a consultant for the AUC on COVID-19 recovery framework, and also a lecturer at university in Kenya, public university. I teach in the School of Disaster Management. That tool looks quite interesting, but I think I didn't understand a bit more. Perhaps you can elaborate more. I mean, for example, at what stage are you using that tool in the development planning cycle? Is it when you are coming up with new projects for the local authorities or urban areas? Are you getting me?
We can hear you.
Yeah, I just wondering at what stage you are using at when you are planning, because some of these local authorities have been there for so long. and they have serious challenges related to resilience. The risk is accumulating, and they need to be assisted. So sometimes the various components of planning in the city, like infrastructure, you have water and sanitation, and so on and so on. So at what point are you doing it at a project level or at a citywide integrated planning for the city or upper rural area or local authorities? So that's my first concern. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you. Alex, would you like to take the question? Alex?
Yes, thank you. I was struggling to unmute my microphone. So thank you, Dr. Nandiko. I think that's a very good question. In terms of the implementation, at what level the CityRAP 2 is implemented? It can be implemented at two level. It can also be implemented at community level or neighborhood level. Depending on if the city is very big. Now, the case study that we're looking at today, the case study of Kanyama informal settlement, because the city of Lusaka is large, and obviously it would not make a tool for the city of Lusaka, which has close to 2.4 million people now. We decided to implement the CityRAP 2 at neighborhood to be implemented for medium-sized to small cities. If, for example, in Zambia, we implemented the CityRAP 2 at city level for the city of Chipata, because Chipata is a secondary city, a small city. But for Lusaka, we implemented the 2 at neighborhood level. The 2 is very useful, actually, in bringing together whatever the city has been going through in terms of its already existing plans or even non-existent plans to identify where the loopholes are. The CityRAP 2, remember, is not a plan. It's an action framework. It is a catalytic tool that's supposed to point to very, very specific, very direct intervention.
I think Alex is having some technical challenges, and I'm seeing one more question for him, and I'm sure he hasn't finished answering the previous question, but I think we can move on to the next section where the practitioners, municipality, and our representative from the community talk about the experience with CityRAP, and then we'll have Alex again, and he'll be able to continue answering your questions. So on this section, the first question I would like to ask to our panelists is, what are the factors that negatively or positively impact the success rate of participatory planning approaches for informal settlements? Because in Lusaka, this CityRAP was implemented in Kanyama, which is an informal settlement. So we want to understand what specific factors that negatively or positively impact this process. I think we can start with Charity, and then the other panelists will also have a chance to answer this question. Charity, please.
Thank you, Neromia. The positive impacts that this tool has, I would speak of its ability to use what we call a human-based approach to issues. that are identified, because now you work with the people in the communities themselves and you involve them in identifying their own problems and then also identifying the solutions to their problems that they're facing in terms of achieving the resilience of their city, becomes easier or lightens the burden in terms of planning for us to pinpoint where is it that we have the problem and what is it that we need to work on. So this is like a positive that the tool brings. But on the negative side of that, I would like to point out that as much as we engage the stakeholders in the city to try and find the solution or fund the solutions that were proposed by the communities, it was difficult to actually get funding, and we are still looking for funding to be able to implement. But nevertheless, even if it is a negative, it's still a positive, because we know that now for this particular challenge, let's say if it's on flooding, that the problem that the community had identified that was flooding, and this flooding was caused by solid waste, then you can be able to pinpoint the solution and say, okay, the funding that is required for us to resolve this solid waste management in this community is this much. So you'll be able to approach a stakeholder using that action that or that plan that you've come up with. And then also other partners that are working within that area can be sorting out that problem bit by bit. I think that is a positive that the tool I can speak about on the part of the municipality in using city wraps.
Okay.
I can continue. Yeah, but I think David maybe can say more.
Yeah. Yes, David. Are there any negative impacts, any negative things that impact the success rate of these approaches?
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I think Charity has said much of what has transpired in the case of Kanyama. But just to add, I'll also start with the positive side. My first point being that the fact that this is a tool that emphasizes a bottom-up approach. So there's a positive in that aspect, because then you get to mobilize the community. And I, being one of the people that works in the CSOs that interact every day with the communities, so getting people local community members to participate in a tool, in the implementation, or to understand a tool like this one is a positive, because then you are bringing in various forms of experiences from the technocrats and also from the lay persons in the community. They've got various experiences that become helpful in identifying first the problems, but also more importantly, finding solutions to address the problems. Like in this case, in terms of the flooding in Kanyama, it was important not just to get the technocrats. Yes, if there's this expert knowledge that they'll bring on the table, but you've got the local people themselves who are faced with that challenge. They understand how do they contribute to that challenge, they themselves, number one, and two, how then can they be part of the solution to solving that problem. So that is a positive factor in that respect. And then the second positive factor is that the CityRap tool is able to bring the local people together with a local authority to sit on the same table and discuss developmental issues. And sometimes for those that work with the local authorities, it might not be so easy. It's not every day that local authorities will sit with communities and say, what issues are here, how can we work together? But through this CityRap tool, it's able to provide that interface where you've got community people, the women and everyone else concerned, and then you've got local authorities on the other end and sitting on the same table and talk about issues that affect the city or the neighborhood. On the negative side, I think much has to do with, of course, resources, but then also there's an issue of, you know, in a multi-stakeholder arrangement, you have situations of where sometimes to get people. Julian, could you mute the mic, please? Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I was saying in a multi-stakeholder arrangement, you've got various stakeholders and they've got different ways of looking at the same problem. A technocrat will look at an issue of flooding in a different way from maybe a woman who sells merchandise by the roadside would. Okay, so to try and harmonize those differences, it can be a process that can take a bit of time, but it's worth it because then at the end of the day, you have a group of people that then speak one language. I think that's what I would say for now.
Thank you, David. Alex, would you like to chip in?
I think I can add before Alex comes in.
Yeah.
Yeah, on the issue that David has raised, where you have multi-stakeholders and each one of them has got different plans on how they want to implement it. But using the CityRap tool, I think we found it easier to work together with other stakeholders and focus on the challenges that the community is facing. Like in the case of Kanyama, if we say we want to focus on drainage works, for instance, if there's a plan or there's a funding that is already being already given for implementation, would have suggested and say, okay, we have a plan in Kanyama and this is a road that was chosen. Can this road please be worked on? Because that is the roadmap that we are taking. The plan is already there. And if there's an organization that is coming in to help us to do certain works, we point to that plan and that makes it easier for us.
Okay. And Charity, how do these organizations know that you have implemented CityRap in a particular area, like in Kanyama? Do they approach you, or do you approach them?
Yeah. The thing is, we work in partnership. So those that come, if you don't speak up as a local authority, it becomes very difficult for people to know that you have a plan. So the first point of contact is our national office, which is the Minister of Local Government, and they need to know that there's this CityRap that we did, and it identified 5 priority areas that they needed to work in Kanyama. If there's any stakeholder that wants to work in Kanyama, we already have this which they can build on. If there's something that we left out in terms of maybe the work that was done, at least it's a start where that organization can begin from and then implement issues in that regard. That's the way we are approaching it. So it's us, the local authority, to approach the organization by giving them the city by giving us the plan that we have, and also talking to the community that they are the ones where stakeholders go to. So if these are the things that they want to implement, the stakeholders, when they go to the community, they should be able to talk about these things because they've identified them as priorities. Yes. And then they should also engage the people, the other organization to help them implement the solutions that they have proposed. Thank you, Marimia.
Thanks, Charity. And David, from the community's perspective, when they're in the community, what are some of the barriers that prevent them from participating fully in this process?
Thank you very much for that question. And I think in answering that, I'll try also to combine with a question from Dr. Nyandeka that I've seen in the chat box. So, but to start with, in communities, quite all right, there could be a number of barriers that may hinder people from participating. And I think from our experience is mostly the lack of information. When people do not know, then it's difficult for them to come on board and participate. So what the City Rap 2 has done is to open up communication avenues where the youth, the women, the differently able, different interest groups in communities are brought on the same table and then are made aware of what the City Rap 2 is all about, and just re-emphasizing their importance of them inputting into this process as we move forward. So mostly the biggest barrier is the lack of information. When people don't know, then it becomes difficult. But then, like I've mentioned with the City Rap 2, we were able, and I think in the now I'm answering Dr. Nyandeka's question where he wanted to understand how the tool ensures that vulnerable groups that are usually more impacted by disasters are fully involved. There is a deliberate approach of community mobilization. And by community mobilization, we are not just focusing on a singular group of people, but we are focusing on different segments of community. They could be traders, the ordinary community residents, they could be community leaders, but youth representatives, women representatives. It itself ensures that all these interest groups are mobilized and are brought to the table so that when discussions begin from the word, their input is taken on board and they're part of the process all the way through, so that when it comes to identifying solutions, for example, if it's floods in Kanyama, you need to think of a solution for a person who moves on a wheelchair as well. As much as you want a solution for a person who is able to walk on two legs.
Yeah, thank you, David. And in relation to that, for communities, they struggle, I think, sometimes with meaningful participation. So how do we move this from just a consultative forum where the government comes and asks the community, what do you want? Or these are our plans, do you agree with them? To something that is more collaborative, that the community and then the municipalities have a more collaborative partnership instead of just a forum that a consultative forum. What about that?
Well, of course, I do take note of certain community members, their participation is not really to the level where they would say we've been part of this and the impact of our participation has been ABCD. So with the City Rap, the difference is that identification of problems and even identification of solutions, the community themselves are the lead. Okay,
yeah.
It's not so much about getting a technocrat and say, here you've got a problem of flooding and we've done a design and we think this can solve a problem. So what do you think? But it's about what is your disaster issue here in Kanyama? And then it comes from the people themselves. It's flooding. Okay, let's map together. Let's do the mapping of Kanyama together. Let's identify areas that are prone to floods. What do you think can be done to address this? And then it comes from the community. We need this kind of help. We need this kind of help. We need these kind of resources. And then more importantly, it's also it also raises awareness amongst the community members that they themselves are a resource. Just by them inputting, they are being a very useful resource in that regard. But also more importantly, it's also about it's also about getting communities to realize that we've got a problem here. We're able to identify this problem. We need to identify a solution. But then before we go outside and look for external help, what is it that we have as a community that can contribute to addressing this problem? It could be human resource, it could be anything. So the community themselves are able to map the resources that could positively go towards addressing that problem. And then whatever is missing, that's when now you would say, okay, this is missing, the community cannot afford. What avenues are there to get other resources from outside the community? It could be from the central government or any other development partners that might be interested to come on board and be part of the solution. And the people, for example, like in the case of Kanyama, got like committee, if I can put it that way, within the community that has been or was instrumental from the identification of you know, people to be trained, the training itself, and everything that has been happening. There's a team on the ground, a local team that has been so instrumental in ensuring that things are moving and in pushing the local authority to say, we ended here, so we needed to move.
Please mute. Please mute your. Sorry,
Charity.
continue.
Okay,
Yes,
yeah, I think
I wanted to add on what you have said and also contribute to the comment or the question on data in the chat. Yes, that's the more reason why from the beginning we work with the communities to identify the problem and identify the space that the problem is existing in, and then also identify which partners we can interact with or collaborate with in terms of finding the solution or finding funding for the problem that has been identified. So yes, the data is available, and that data is what we use to contact the government officials or NGOs that want to work in there. Like in the case of this city resilience, the maps were identified, they were prepared. We had experts from city planning to go on the ground to actually map out those areas and produce maps which we can use to communicate to each stakeholders, including the high level communication. We also had to look at how do we communicate this information to high level stakeholders and who do we use to be able to be heard that this is the problem that was identified. So in the City Rep training itself, that was also one of the things that we did in terms of communicating to relevant stakeholders to be able to find a solution.
Okay, and when you say high level stakeholders, what are you talking about? Who do you mean?
I mean the politicians. There's a way you communicate. You can't give them a big document and expect them to read, but then there's a way you can make them understand the maps and say, this is where the solution is. And by using the colors in the city wrap that were presented in the city wrap 2, they could actually see the magnitude of the problem. And that was very useful. I think that was done in the using city wrap.
That's very interesting, Charity. And are there any innovative mapping techniques that you use for the community to kind of understand how to map and what to map in not the traditional mapping, not the traditional mapping methods that we use, but something innovative? Is there anything that the communities in Kanyama have come up with in that regard?
Exactly. Thank you so much. And I think that was what was explained. If you see the pictures, if you can be able to put up the pictures, you could see the community round the table looking at the maps. It's first of all to get the map as an expert and then ask them to point those areas. That is like the way we do resource mapping, and then identify those areas where you think your resource is. But in this case, we're asking them to identify where they think the disasters happen, or where do they put themselves in that whole map area. Then also teach the communities to use the simple handheld GPS and actually pick points themselves. So that was the skill that was taught from the city planning staff. Then you teach it to the communities to be able to identify the areas. And that was easy for us to be able to produce the maps.
Okay, that's very interesting. And David, do you think there are any other ways that we can strengthen community capacities to enable them to participate fully, to have meaningful participation? Any other ways apart from innovative mapping methods and such like? David?
Thank you for that question. I think apart from innovative, yes, I'm here.
Yeah.
So I was saying, apart from innovative mapping techniques or methods that were employed as in the case of Kanyama, I feel one of the ways that we can increase community participation is, a community to be part of the process in terms of community dialogue forums or peer-to-peer learning platforms within the community itself, where you have people in one corner of the community and people in the other corner of the community coming together and then discuss what are the issues, for example, in this corner of the community. For example, if there's a success story in one corner of the community, you bring that community together with another community that maybe still be grappling with such a challenge, and say, can you learn from your peers on how best they handled their situation, and CITRAP does allow for that, where communities can come together and learn from amongst themselves. But it's also about creating local champions. When we create local champions in communities, it will be much more easier for the message to be spread, and for people to understand these are people they know, these are people that they live with, and when they speak, it's much more easier for them to understand them, and they're likely to speak in a language that the community will understand best.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes the technocrat who explain in a more technical way, and lose people along the way. But once we create community champions, then one of the ways in which we can enhance community participation, because then it would encourage everyone to come on board and become change agents in their community. And CITRAP does allow for that.
Okay. Thank you, David. Alex, sorry.
Please. Where?
Alex, are you with us?
I beg you. I mean, not somebody. I want to to your phone so you can have to start calling me people here.
I think Alex is still having a challenge. So, David and Charity, you talked about having these community champions and having them communicate with the communities in a way that they can understand. And David, you also said that you mobilize people in groups. And what about those community members that are not organized groups? So let's say people who are market women, you'll have a session with them. People who work in construction, you'll have a session with them. What about community members that are not part of organized groups? How do you bring them into this conversation? And also, how do you extract indigenous knowledge from people who might not be able to come to these meetings?
Okay. One of the ways in which to get people that may not be part of unorganized arrangements in these communities is to work through local structures. In Zambia, we've got what we're calling ward development a committee, and then we've got zones, because communities are divided into zones.
Mm-hmm.
And working through structures, then we are able to get or to draw the participation of people that are not really part of any organized grouping in the community, as the case may be, maybe for example with traders or any other group, or maybe youths or something like that. So mostly we do work with those community structures, because for example, zone has got a certain number of houses,
Mm-hmm.
and the nature of the meeting and the numbers that you want. So you would say from this zone, you communicate with the zone leader. From your zone, you need this number of people, and also a criteria is drawn out to say, from the people that are going to bring, let there be people, for example, the elderly, because obviously they could have lived in a community for a very long time. They've got a different experience from the young ones. Bring the young ones on board. Let's have women. Let's have any other person that may be useful in that target area to come from it. And that's one of the things that we use to draw their participation. And in terms of extracting indigenous knowledge, of course, we do also rely on our community structures to identify.
Please mute your microphones so we can hear kindly.
Okay, maybe I can proceed. So I was saying, in terms of extracting indigenous knowledge.
Yeah.
Okay, so I was saying,
please mute your microphones.
I was saying, working with community. Yeah. Okay.
Sorry. Okay. Yeah, I think you can continue now. Sorry.
Yeah. Quickly before Charity comes in. So working with community structures as well as organized groups in the community is what enabled us in this regard, in terms of, in the case of Kanyama, to extract indigenous knowledge in terms of experiences when it comes to flooding in the area. It is through those structures that then we're able to identify people that have got the knowledge that was useful in this process in terms of informing problem identification and also finding solutions. So we basically worked through community structures and, of course, organized groupings. And by organized groups, we're talking about, it was open: religious groups, youth groups, women groups, groups for traders, or people that are doing big businesses in the community, and any other groups that we could identify that existed. Charity, you may want to add one or two.
Yes, David, exactly what you have said. And also the groups that were not organized, were able to capture them during public meetings, because the tool also provides that at least one public meeting where you have to go back to the community and tell them, okay, this is what we identified, or this group, this is the things that they identified from your communities. Do you agree with them? Do you think we should change, or do you think we should add? Do you have any other challenges that you feel might be identified? So the process is led by someone from the municipality to help them actually bring out some of the things that they could have, or bring out the gaps that could have been left out. Then also in the chat, I've seen where someone is talking about the tool being able to identify the triggers only and not the sources. No. The tool also can identify the sources, because when you go down in the communities and you keep asking why, and you continue asking why, and then you get to the bottom or to the root of the problem. So that gives you an opportunity to see that nothing is left out, and then also to help the communities to be able to see, okay, if we sorted out the root cause of this problem, would we then respond to a number of challenges, or would be able to resolve this challenge that we have? An example I would give is that flooding was mentioned, like in Kanyama. Flooding was mentioned as one of the key problems that they had. So then we had to ask, but why flooding? Is it because of the way the land is? Because that is what we were reporting in our reports as planners, that no, it's because of the dolomite that is lying in Lusaka that water can seep through and so forth. But then they had to identify, no, we have a problem of drainage. No, these drainages, the drains are blocked because of solid waste. Okay, solid waste is also a challenge. No, it's not about solid waste only, but it's because we do not have the what do you call, where water just collects and then it doesn't have outlets and all those. So the engineers now come in and use the right terms and say, okay, this is the problem that we have. I think that is how we work with it, to try to get to the bottom of the problem and also propose workable solutions that we could plan for. Thank you.
Thank you, Charity. I'm seeing we have a question by Thabo. Thabo, would you like to ask?
Okay, thank you so much. I just wanted to check in terms of engagement with communities. How are they dealing with, the well up? Because you may get into an urban setting and you find that you have those that are in the high density, low density, and medium density. And in terms of involving these communities in whatever discussion, what strategies are they using to make sure that all the groups are equally represented? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Charity, would you like to take the question? Or David?
I can take the question. Yes, please. Yeah. So in the settlement that we implemented CityRap, so we had to look at how the settlement is made up. Yes, there are people who are in, we can say they are all in high density areas because of the way the settlement is made up. But within that high density area, there are classes of people. There are those who are in areas where there are no passable roads, like for instance, and then there are those who are nearer in terms of nearer to the services or amenities. So then they can't speak for the others. So like David said, we had to ask for zones. So which zone is going to be represented? So if, the leaders of the community had to choose at least 2 or 3 people from the zone whom we can interact with at different levels. If in the first training we did not interact with them, then in the next training we try and interact with the others so that we have representation from everyone. That is how we had handled it as city officials.
Okay.
I hope I've answered your question. Yeah.
Thank you, Charity. I think now we can move on to our next session, where we have directed questions, some for the municipality, some for our community representatives, and some for our experts. So I think we'll start with David as the community representative. So the first question I'd like to ask you, David, is what about expectations and participation fatigue? So for example, here in Kenya, sometimes when we have these participatory planning events, the community is tired of being called for meetings, constantly being called for meetings, and then there's no tangible action on the ground. So how do you deal with that when the community is not very interested in participating because of the fatigue?
Thank you very much for that question. Indeed, it's a common scenario. I think even in Zambia, they like to believe in many other setups of such nature across the sub-Saharan continent. But in the case of Zambia and Kanyama, to be specific, the key, like in the case of the CityRap, has been to let the community drive the process themselves. That way, it becomes easier to identify where things are not moving, where the community feels, I think this is lagging, and how can it be changed? And what does that change look like, so that results are seen, okay, as envisaged originally when the process was beginning. So because I think from past experience,
David, are you there?
that in most cases, community behind. So I'm back. Sorry, I experienced a network break. In the past, the experience has been that technocrats would lead the process, and the communities would just follow behind. And sometimes even when they fall off, you wouldn't know. By the time you realize that actually the community are fatigued and their thinking has changed, maybe you're at a very different stage. But in this process, it has been all about letting the community to drive the process themselves, so that where there are issues, they're quickly identified and changes are implemented so that results are seen. So like in the process of Kanyama, resource mapping, all the processes that are outlined in the city RAP 2, it's the community that has been spearheading, of course, working hand in hand with the local authority, but they've been very much at the helm of driving the whole process. Yeah.
Thank you, David. And what about managing the power relations? So in these meetings, sometimes within the community representatives kind of take over the conversation and speak on behalf of the community, and some people are left behind. So they're participating, they're there at the meetings, but they're very quiet, they're very subdued, and their representatives take over the conversation and speak on their behalf, while we want the participatory planning to be inclusive. So how do you deal with this type of power imbalances within the communities? So we'll say someone from, let's say, someone who's a bit more wealthy within the community is given a chance to speak more, or sometimes it's gendered, the men speak more, or sometimes the youth don't get a chance to properly state their opinions. So how do you deal with these power imbalances within the communities during these sessions, David?
Yeah, so to ensure that we get, or the process manages to get the best out of each and every group representative of the community, the whole idea is about having separate, yes, we can have public meetings where everybody comes, but like you said, you have maybe 3 or 4 people speaking, and maybe those might be considered either the community leaders, or maybe they're considered as the affluent in the community. Yeah. But then having separate meetings with women, separate meetings with youths, separate meetings with traders, then you get to really the issues are, what is it that they feel is not being addressed or should be addressed, and how that can be done. And then also in the long run, it's also about when you have meetings with these different groups, also you make sure that the engagement does not end at just one meeting. You have a meeting with women today, and then there's nothing happening, and then the next thing you hear, or there's this happening, and then the women are like, but we only had a meeting once. So it's about also constant engagement with these various groups, so that they are constantly engaged, they're constantly part of the process, so that their views, their input is taken on board.
And how do you then converge these different opinions and different contributions from the different groups? So you have engagements with women groups, with the youth, and with traders, for example. What if they have different solutions to the same problem? What happens at that point?
A very, very good question. So obviously, in such an arrangement, you get sometimes a difference in opinion on how the same problem can be addressed.
Yeah.
So, so like I think I mentioned earlier on, let's say, And that's now you have to get all these interest groups together and then you walk through the process of harmonization to try and harmonize. The women think this problem can be addressed this way. On the other hand, the traders are thinking it can be addressed this way, and so on and so forth. So it's about bringing these various stakeholders now on a round table. The technocrats are there from the local authorities or maybe even the other interested stakeholders, and then walk through the process of harmonizing those differences so that at the end of the day, we have a situation where the solution that has been found is a solution that will work for everyone, because then we will not leave anyone behind.
Right. Yeah, I see a question from Lovu. Tabo, would you like to ask a question?
Okay, thank you so much, Madam. I think one of the issues we have just raised it in terms of harmonizing, but I just wanted to check in terms of the influence of political capital in all this. How are they engaging with the political players, given that, politics is a very, very important capital in terms of influence, resources, you name it. So how are they balancing the, the political aspects, during these discussions? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Tavo, for that question. Yes, indeed, I agree with you. Political capital is very, how can I put it? It plays a critical role in terms of influencing communities, and sometimes maybe for the good, or sometimes to the detriment of the developmental agenda that might be on the table at the time. So in terms of specifically speaking, in terms of the CityRap tool, what a tool does provide is a framework that allows for the participation of political players, but at the same time, without really them having a greater influence on what is going on. The process has to be driven by the community themselves. So the politicians, they have to provide political will in terms of making sure that as the process is being undertaken, it's within development framework of, for example, what they want or the zone seeks to achieve. So within the tool is a framework that allows for the participation or to ride on the political capital, but at the same time ensuring that the process is community driven. And what we mean by say community driven, it's not about the affluent in the community, because like Charity had mentioned, in informal settlements, the different social statuses. Okay, you've got those that could really be very poor and those that are somewhat poor, and then those that consider themselves well-to-do, but within an informal settlement. So to ensure that we curtail against the perceived affluent hijacking the process and driving it in a different direction is by making sure that the steering committees and everyone else that is on board, that group is a true reflection of the different types of people that are in that community.
Can I add?
Yeah, please, Charity.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, he has just hit the nail on the head, because with this political influence, it's very important even in this whole process. You need it. There's no way you can actually say you put it away. Even if the community is in opposition, the development agenda is that these problems, the problems that have been identified, the solutions that have been provided need to be worked on. So it's now the skills of the professional to see that when you bring them to the round table, you are speaking the language that brings development. So that requires the skill. If the officials don't have it, you call in an expert that can sit down both ends and let the solutions and also the problems that have been identified be the real issues that are happening in that community. So you don't beat about the bush, you use your skill, you use the people that can deliver the information, and you use the best communication skills that are available or tools that are available to actually bring everybody to understand that this is what we are putting in this action plan, and this is what we are looking for it to work. I think that is what we saw with CityRap.
I see. Thank you so much, Charity. That's very interesting. And what about dealing with mistrust within the communities? So we see that some of these informal settlements like Kanyama have been neglected by the government for many years, for a long time. So the communities there don't really trust the government and the people who work for the municipalities. So during these processes, how do you build that trust between the facilitators and the community?
It's very true. Thank you so much, Miriam. Because the thing is that the trust is already broken. So whatever you say, they might not trust you. But what you do is, the skill again comes to play there. You need to communicate and bring the issues that you want to communicate in a clear picture without leaving anyone behind. So in this CityRap, it's like you're co-creating this solution together with the community, and then also agreeing. There's no mistrust there. What is there is clear, and because they've been like the fatigue that you're talking about, they've seen you go to the community. There hasn't been any funding that has come through. You go back and again another year, no, this is another project. We try to do this, but in this case, you try to ask them to be part of the solution in terms of pushing also to look for funding. Like I said before, it's not only the local authority that engages in looking for funding. Yes, we do the proposals and we send them through, but if there's any client or any organization that wants to work in the community and those solutions, the community themselves have them, they can still present those solutions and works can still start happening hand in hand, working with the local authority. That's how we do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Charity. I see we have a question from Matola. Matola, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you. I would love to understand if you have any relationship between power relations and the participation fatigue, or in other way around, can power relations affect, or can be participation fatigue affected by power relations within the community?
Yes, in terms of power relations and participation, yes, it can be affected. Remember, I think in one of the things I said earlier was that political will, for instance, is very important in driving the process. So in terms of power relations between the youths and the elderly and the women and the men, or the organized groups and the unorganized groups, so you as an expert have to see how you manage those power relations by bringing them to the table to discuss the solution. Maybe you, like I said, the communication skill itself, if you want to use color codes, like to show the problem or the magnitude of the problem, and also show the solution in beautiful colors, the tool can be able to help you to do that. Like you can be able to say, okay, if we did this and provided this solution, this is how it would look. Then in using the tool itself, like let's say in managing between management, the lower people and also management in an organization setting, we're able to see to it that also the tool was providing in terms of color codes. Where is the problem really? Like when you say okay, is it a financial issue or is a capacity issue? So if the lower levels say, okay, it's a capacity issue, and the management say, no, it's a financial issue, then you need to talk about those issues and see, okay, what is it that we're going to talk about? I mean, what is it that we're going to find a balance and see that, okay, maybe this is the root cause of the whole thing. So that is how we manage it using the tool. So yes, there is a relationship between power relations and also participation, for both at organizational level and also at community level. I hope you're able to pick something out of that.
Okay, thank you, Charity. I hope that has answered your question, Matola. Now, what about the results of the participatory process? So what if those results don't go in line with the national plans that are already in place, or the municipal plans that are already in place? What if those results don't go in line with those plans? Then what happens, and how can we make them go in parallel? Charity.
Yeah, so you find that they've given you like 12 solutions to the problem, or they've given you 12 problems, and then you have 12 solutions, and you can only present maybe 4 or 3 solutions. So you still have to do the ranking and see how it works. So then in trying to see that they're in line with the national agenda, you have to be able to see what is it that the government is trying to do, and then communicate that to the community that this is what the government is trying to do. But even if the government is trying to do this, how then are we going to resolve these things that we have looked at that are not being targets for the government for now? Then they can provide solutions like, maybe we can contact this NGO, maybe we can contact that, maybe we can look for funding and do that. Yeah, that's exactly what we did. One example I would give exactly in reference to that is the drainage works, because the government had already done drainage works with the support of the American government. For us, there was a drainage that was left out, and that drainage is the one that leads also into Kanyama. And it's part of the problem that was identified in trying to cause the flooding that is resistant in that area. So then, and then when you look at the magnitude of the problem, yes, it's a problem, but then it's not a problem that you can resolve at neighborhood level. So you actually get that problem and then try and see how the national level can be able to resolve it. So the leader of that community then picks it up and presents that problem in another forum where it can be taken up, and the community is left to look at issues that they can resolve themselves in line with the government. That is how we worked.
I see. Okay, and you had talked about resources before in our previous session. So in line with this, how can this process be done with very little resources? So let's say, for example, you don't have the support of big organizations or non-governmental organizations. How can those community champions continue to, because this is a continuous process, resilience is a continuous process, and finding solutions for these problems is a continuous process. So how can they continue with this process with the limited resources within the community without support from the outside? David or Charity, please.
Yeah, that's one of the most difficult things for projects to be successful. So in terms of getting or ensuring that communities and or the solutions that have been found are implemented in a more continuous process,
with or without support from the government or any other support, then it's the only way to achieve that is to get the community themselves to start thinking about using community resources to solve those problems. In a way, and it becomes a very tricky because you're working in a community where people are, or poverty levels are already high. And if you talk about community resources, already by the nature of the community you're working in terms of if it's financial resources, they could be quite scarce. Even other technical resources may be scarce. But Zambia, or in Kanyama in particular, Zambia's got a system of a community development fund, and also it cascades down to like a ward development fund, and these are that are given in the national budget every year, the local level.
Yeah.
And at that local level, the communities are part of the process to identify the allocation that they have received for that year. What are the pertinent issues that they can then address using the resources that they have received? So that is one of the avenues that then communities like Kanyama and other communities, in our case, then can use, because at least they've got a guarantee that every year there's this basket that comes. So then it's about priority now. How do we ensure that in this basket, how much can we say we can use to go towards it? But aside of that, it's also about the community. They may not contribute in monetary terms, but they can contribute in terms of sweat equity for things like drainages and
David, I think we've lost you. And I see we have
Can I jump in?
now. So I was saying in any other form.
Yeah.
Can I jump in on that aspect?
Yes, please.
This is Alex.
Alex, yeah.
I've rejoined, thank you. I've rejoined using a different computer. Okay. I just want to say that David is right. Zambia has been moving towards a more decentralized kind of governance system.
My connection was this.
Yes, Alex, continue.
Yes, so the Constituency Development Fund, which I know exists in many countries, for Zambia, it is one of those funds that can be used, in fact, has been used in the past to fulfill community needs. Now, what the CityRAP does is that it helps the community to work together to identify real priorities. Because in the past, what has been happening is that the Constituency Development Fund has been applied on projects which have really not been determined through participatory processes in which community members and stakeholders are involved. So the CityRAP process actually provides that avenue of presenting projects, or presenting priorities which the community themselves have selected and identified. Now, once, for example, for 2022, the CDF begins to be applied, it makes it easier for the community then to say, these are some of the needs that we already have, and to pick one of those needs, 6 priorities from the CityRAP process to then implement. Now, as David said, the CDF, the Constituency Development Fund, also cascades to a Ward Development Fund, which has not been very regular, but the Constituency Development Fund is actually quite large. For 2022, we are talking about $1 million, available per constituency. So it's quite a large amount of money, and where there is an objective process, an objective participatory process that has been done with community members and stakeholders of that particular area, or if it has been done at a city level with the city, working together with stakeholders, it makes it easier for the city to select what its priorities are. And this is not resources coming from outside government. This is resources coming from within government itself. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Alex, and thank you for joining us again. And within this constituency development fund, are there some funds for the actual process of participation?
No, not at the moment. No, the CDF is reserved for actual projects themselves. Yeah. Now, this is where now the community can organize itself with the support of either community-based organizations or with the support of non-governmental organizations or with the support of other facilitators to ensure that they reach a point where they have selected the particular priorities or projects that they actually want to do. Now, the CityRap process is really not even it's a very flexible and easy to use tool, which can be implemented at neighborhood level, even smaller than Kanyama, really. Because Kanyama is a constituency, it can be implemented in Zambia. We have a lower level below constituency, which is called the ward. Mm-hmm. So the CityRap tool can also be implemented at ward level, in which case you are really narrowing down to a particular area which is facing very specific and particular issues. So it can be implemented even at that particular level, or it can be implemented at city or constituency or even at lower level. For communities then to reduce their costs, mm-hmm. And then implement that particular tool to identify their own local needs. For Lusaka, in the CityRap process itself, what we do is at the beginning of the process, we ask council or local government to identify for us 5 or 6 people whom we can work with. The CityRap process, actually, as it is taking place, is also a capacity building process for council officials. We identify those council officials to build their capacity to share the knowledge. And throughout the process, we are also sharing roles and responsibilities because the process is not entirely done. For example, when UN Habitat was doing it, it wasn't entirely done by ourselves. Mm-hmm. We introduced the process and then begin to share roles and responsibilities with our colleagues in council so that in the process, we're doing role plays and building their capacity. So at the end of the day, I mean, you have people like Charity who can actually do the process even if UN Habitat is not there. So these are the people then whom the community can pick on, who are already involved in working in the communities and are being paid by council to work in those communities. So those people can actually facilitate, those council people can actually facilitate the CityRap 2 process and also train community members whom they are working with to pass on that knowledge so that, you know, we begin to have more and more trainers and facilitators. That way we reduce the cost and it almost becomes zero apart from you providing logistics and maybe some lunch or something like that. It becomes, makes it easier. Yeah. For the process then to be implemented to identify priorities so that when the CDF comes, those mm-hmm. priorities are already there. Thank you.
I see. I'm seeing a few questions from our participants, but before the Q&A, we'll have a Q&A session just immediately after this. But Alex, I'd like to ask you, since you have been a facilitator of this tool, not only in Kanyama, but in many cities in Africa, what are the lessons from Zambia to Africa, do you think, in regards to facilitation, in regards to the whole process of CityRap? And what are the most interesting observations or similarities or differences from the process in different locations?
Yeah, I think first observation in the CityRap processes I've been involved in Southern Africa, Zambia included, mm-hmm. is that I have seen that in all of the areas where we've gone to implement this tool, people and local government have been keen to solve their own problems. They just don't want people to move in and tell them what to do. They've been keen to be part of a process that helps them to identify their own issues and problems, and also then guides them in identifying their own solutions. When we arrive in any city, we quickly inform the local authority that this is no ordinary process. It is not us leading the process, it's you leading and driving the process, and we will help you to get to where you want to get. So that's one of the most interesting observations I've made. And also I've noticed that when we begin the process, there's a lot of suspicion, thinking there's a hidden agenda, we want to push it in a particular direction. But most stakeholders are surprised that there's no hidden agenda. They are the drivers of the process. We have developed a tool which can be used by them at any time that they want to use the tool, with no hidden agenda. And we're open, we're keeping our eyes open to see which direction they want to go, so that we strengthen that direction in which they want to go. And then it's been exciting for them to see that the tool is adaptable. It's a very adaptable tool, because we as facilitators, we keep our eyes open to make sure that it is adaptable as possible and fits in with what the city wants to achieve. In Lilongwe, for example, we adjusted our facilitation methods to include speaking in vernacular, so that colleagues who were not able to speak in English and express themselves in English could express themselves in Chichewa. But also what we do as facilitators is to be very observant, to notice those stakeholders who are very quiet, because there are those who can be very overbearing and, you know, keep on contributing and keep on contributing. We particularly notice those, the vulnerable ones, and encourage them to participate. In fact, for Lilongwe, and I know for Chipata and also Mutare in Zimbabwe, we made some of those people as facilitators, you know, with us, you know, to just strengthen and build their capacity. One thing I have noticed, though, in all of the places is that the capacity of the local government, the councils, has a significant impact on the process. And I've noticed that where the local authority is a bit stronger, you know, the process is taken on quickly, and you know, the local government begins to run with the process much more quickly. But where the local government is a little bit weaker, we do a bit more hand-holding throughout the 3 or 4 month process, so that they begin to feel much more confident. And we help them then, as UN Habitat, we help the council to identify their own weaknesses through the municipal mapping, so that they are aware, you know, of what it is that they can do, what it is that they cannot do. And then we begin to assist them to identify areas in which, or sources of support to build their capacity. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you for that elaborated answer, and talking about facilitation, because we had talked about it earlier when you were not connected, but thanks for your comments on that. And my colleague Laya is going to post the link in the chat where you can where you can find the CityRap tool, and it can also be implemented in French as well. Some of our listeners from Cameroon have asked, so in the chat there is a link for where you can find the CityRap tool. And with that, I think now we can go on to our question and answer session. We have a question from Ruth. Ruth, would you like to ask your question? If Ruth is not ready, then Nicodemus, would you like to ask your question? No?
Okay, thank you very much. It's Mary Mia who is on the floor.
Yeah, Jeremiah, yes.
Okay, thank you for giving me the platform. Mine is not a question as such, but an addendum to the earlier conversation which was going on issues about the resources being directed to support the process of these CityRap activities, and also to implement resilience outcomes at the city level. As from these discussions, it looks like it's a challenge. And I was wondering if the problem which we have across sub-Saharan Africa, from my little experience, is a lack of evidence from the ground to show that the communities are at risk, so that these policymakers, which Thabo mentioned, the political capital can be mobilized once you demonstrate that indeed there is communities are at risk from displacement, from being killed by these disasters, and from infrastructure, the losses, and so on. So the first, which is not coming out clearly, is even before we do this CRAP, we need to have data that is disaggregated on the risk data on the ground. And this is going to be a key in influencing the investors, the policymakers, and also the development partners to give us that support. And this is in line with Sendai Framework Priority number 1, which seeks to promote understanding disaster risk. So that is one observation. The second is enabling environment for this participation for building resilience at city level. It requires this process to be supported by a suitable or appropriate legal and institutional framework across and within sectors. So then you can have this process and being taken forward and the activities being implemented smoothly. And you might find that there might not be a standalone policy on participation. There can be a policy on a disaster risk reduction, but on the other hand, it needs to be supplemented by another policy on participation, because the product from this CTRAP needs to be taken up by the policymakers to be implemented at the city level. So they can take it up or reject it once they have found the findings. But if there is no policy guidelines, it might not be taken up. And then the issue of still funding, there is, from what our colleague mentioned about the Constituency Development Fund, even here in Kenya, we have such, but you'll find much of the fund is just focused on a response and less on reducing the risks. Mm-hmm. And now they say about 5% of the constituency the development fund is for disaster risk reduction, or at the city level, they dedicate a fund for disaster management, but they just wait for the disaster to happen for it to be utilized. And that also goes back to also awareness and understanding risk. So as long as the communities and the decision makers are not on the same page in terms of understanding risk, we'll be struggling so much in mobilizing resources and also getting the political support. And I stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nicodemus, for your comments. Is there anyone else who has a question and would like to pose it to the panelists, please? Ruth? Anyone else with a question? Or a comment? Ruth, I can see your hand is up. Would you like to ask a question? No. Okay. Anyone else who would like to ask a question at this point? Or share an experience with participatory planning from their countries or their cities, and the differences of opinion they have from what has been said in this session? No. Okay. I think with that, we can come to the conclusion of this session. I would like to thank our speakers, Charity Kalombo and David Katungula and Alex. Maybe I can give you 2 more minutes to reintroduce yourselves because of the speakers who joined us later. so they know who they were speaking to, as many of them joined much later in the chat. So David, would you like to reintroduce yourself for 2 minutes, and Charity and Alex?
Okay, thank you very much. My name's David Katungula. I work for People's Process on Housing and Poverty in Zambia. NGO, Sahara, Zambia, and the programs officer there. And in the city RAP 2 implementation in Kanyama, the role that our organization played was basically to help with mobilizing the community members so that then they become part of the implementation of the tool. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Charity, please take 2 minutes to reintroduce yourself. I think Charity has, okay.
My name is Charity Kalombo. I'm from the Sahara City Council. I'm a senior community development officer there in the Department of Housing, and I was part of the city RAP process here in the Sahara Zambia.
Thank you. Thank you, Charity. And now, Alex, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Alexander Chileshe. I work for UN Habitat. I'm supporting the regional office on, I'm a specialist in urbanization and matters related to resilience, basically supporting the regional office in Southern Africa. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, thank you. And thank you for all who were here to listen and to contribute to this very important conversation. My name is Meremia Hussein. I'm also working with UN Habitat, supporting the Regional Office for Africa in urban resilience. And I'd like to conclude this session now. Thanks for all your support from all our partners and from our panelists. I think we can come to the end of this session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.